Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael. I'm going to be your host for around about the next 45 minutes. Welcome along to today's Banking Excellence webinar. It's just one of our webinars in the series that we're running at the moment. We're looking at Sage 50 accounts, and we're looking at specifically bank reconciliation. So that task of matching your transactions against the bank statement. Now, just before we get started with today's webinar, we'll quickly run through a little bit of housekeeping, just in case anyone is fairly new to webinars, or you never know, it might be your first one with us. So as normal, you don't need a microphone for these sessions. If you do have one and you've enabled it as you've joined the session, it will be muted automatically and you can't unmute yourself. So you can't actually talk to us during the session today, but you can submit your questions or comments. If you have those for us, all you need to do is click the little speech bubble icon, which is on your taskbar on the right. It'll expand the panel and you get access to that box in the bottom right hand corner where you can start typing your questions and your comments. Remember to click send. On hand today we've got both Jackie and Matt. They'll be on hand to answer those questions. So you may get a straightforward answer, you may get a link to maybe one of our help articles where there's details like a step-by-step guide. Or if it's a bit more detailed and I think you need a little bit of extra help, a bit more probably a bit more of a conversation to resolve that, they might encourage you to get in touch with our support team. There is the opportunity today to download a handout as well, which is basically just a copy of the slides, the usual two versions of those available, the full color version and also what we term the print-friendly version as well. The link will be included to download a copy of that handout on the follow-up email, so don't worry if you forget to do that, or you download it and you might forget you've done that and not realize where you've saved it or downloaded it to. The webinar is being recorded as normal, and a link to that recording will be included on your follow-up email, which you will receive round about an hour after we finish today's session. And that email will also include links so you can register for future webinars, and also so you can access other recordings as well. So if you have missed any sessions, you're fairly new to webinars, then there are probably well over 100 recordings available now, so loads to fill your time up with if you've got any spare time. So we're helping you to get more from your software, so do watch out for that email. Now, on the subject of upcoming webinars, obviously this webinar forms part of our Banking Excellence webinar series that we're running. So this is session number 3. Session 4 through to 8, which we have already run. We ran them all last week and at the beginning of this week, but we are repeating the sessions. So from 4 to 8, we will be repeating those sessions from next week. The quiz, we've got one of those this afternoon, and also a repeat of that quiz session will take place next week as well. So plenty of opportunities still to register for the sessions if you haven't already done so. Now, if you do attend any 6 of the first 8 sessions, then you will qualify for our Banking Excellence badge. So that's a digital badge that would be issued to you. And you need to attend at least 6 of those topics plus one of the quiz sessions to qualify for that one. So if maybe you've signed up for 5 only plus the quiz, or maybe 6 only and you haven't yet signed up for the quiz, watch out for that follow-up email and get yourself registered. So it's a good opportunity there for you to get that. Right, let's have a look at what we're going to be covering in this morning's session though. So first of all, what is a reconciliation? So for those of you that have never done a reconciliation before, then you might be thinking, well, I've heard of the phrase. Maybe some of you have a rough idea what a reconciliation is. Maybe, and I'm assuming a lot of you will have done a reconciliation before in Sage as well. Some of you will be very experienced on it. You come along today just to maybe get a bit of reassurance that your understanding is right. Are you missing out on anything? Others, you may have just started, so you may have done one or things of that nature where you just really got started with it. So hopefully everyone will be feeling a little bit more positive towards reconciliation, feeling a little bit more confident as well. Obviously, we're going to be running through some demonstrations today, looking at the settings that impact on the reconciliation. We'll look at the process itself. That's where we're going to spend the majority of the time. But also, we're going to pick up on what happens in the background. So if you do a reconciliation, you include certain transactions. What happens to those when you click that reconcile button? That can really help you with your understanding if things go wrong in the future, or maybe you need to do some sort of correction. So hopefully that's just the bit that just almost like puts the cherry on the top of your knowledge in that area. We're going to touch on bank feeds today as well, just to tell you a little bit about them. But session number 4 in this webinar series does cover bank feeds. So we've got more detailed recordings relating to bank feeds available as well. So again, watch out for those links on your follow-up email. You get yourself signed up, or you can watch the recordings. And then just at the end, we'll explain more about the additional support. And if there are any outstanding questions at that point, we'll pick up as many as we can. But do keep them coming. We'll try and pick up as many just as we're working through the sessions as we can. So let's get started with a little bit of background to bank reconciliation. And we'll start with, what is an actual reconciliation? Well, it's basically the task, that process when you receive your bank statement. Now, traditionally that would have been a paper copy, but these days, obviously, it might just be a case you access it. You might even get it emailed to you, but you might just access your online banking, access your transactions that way to see what has cleared your bank. The reconciliation is just the process of matching the transactions in your accounts against those that appear on your bank statement. Now, benefits wise, there's loads of benefits. The ones we've highlighted there: accuracy, because you're comparing your actual transactions in Sage to those on your bank statement, then it means that your account is going to be accurate, certainly as far as the bank is concerned. So just make sure that all the transactions are entered in your accounts. Very easy for you to just miss a transaction on and forget to enter it, or maybe you make a mistake. So it gives you that opportunity by doing that comparison. Security wise, obviously you're working through your bank statement, you're checking those transactions off. So in that process, you might identify transactions that maybe shouldn't have gone out of your bank. So those fraudulent payments, has your bank been hacked, that type of thing, it'll help you identify that. And obviously from a cash flow point of view, keeping on top of your bank and understanding what transactions have and haven't cleared your bank, it'll give you an idea of your cash flow position. So a number of benefits to completing that. Now, the big question, how often should you do it? Now, some people will do that on an annual basis. Historically, you would probably do it on a monthly basis. So you receive your bank statement, and then you would sit there possibly with a month's worth of transactions to tick off. But these days, it's common that people do it on a weekly basis, if not a daily basis. So it's a lot easier for us to access our transaction information against your bank account these days. It might just be via your phone, it might be via a banking app on your PC, logging into your online banking via the internet. So very easy to access that. So it's up to you how often you do it. Now, in addition to the bank reconciliation process, which is always good to understand, even if you're going to be using the bank feed service, it's really good that in the background you understand bank reconciliation. Now, if you've not come across bank feeds, I'm just going to touch on it today. Bank feeds is a free service, and it's a way of setting up a link between your bank account and your Sage. Now, it's not a two-way link. It enables you to download your bank transactions only. So when we go, rather than you wait to receive a bank statement, it can download that information. Now, there's loads of benefits to bank feeds, and it does speed up that matching process that we're going to be looking at the manual aspect of that in today's session. So it can make it a bit more slicker, and you can automate it to a certain extent by setting up rules in bank feeds that as transactions automatically download, you set up a rule so that if the software then recognizes that downloaded bank transaction, it can enter it into your accounts. So again, saves you doing that. Now you can set up to 300 rules, I think it's per bank account in Sage. So loads of scope there to automate quite a few transactions. So we'll touch on that a little bit in a bit more detail a little bit later on, but remember there is that recorded webinar on that area. Right, what we'll do then, we're going to get stuck into some demonstrations with you today. So we're going to start by looking at the settings that you've got available before we even touch the bank reconciliation. So I'll share my screen, and the three of the options that I want to pick up on first of all, you find the first one by going into settings and then bank defaults. And it's this option here, create bank reconciliation PDF. So this will be switched on by default, and I wouldn't say leave it switched on. You can always manually delete the PDF afterwards if you want to, but it's not something, if you've got it switched off, that you can then retrospectively create this PDF documents. So what I'm referring to with this create bank reconciliation PDF is when you get to the end of your reconciliation and you click that button to reconcile, to flag your transactions, the software will take a copy of the transactions that you've reconciled, almost like creating a bank statement from Sage on the transactions that you've reconciled this time around. It creates that as a PDF document and it stores it in Sage for you. So it is something that's optional. It might be something you never need, but it's better to have it. And then if you don't want it or don't need it, well, you could just leave it there. It doesn't takes up next to no space, but you could always get rid of it. But if you don't create it in the first place, then you can't then get a copy of that should you need it in the future. So leave that option ticked. The other one to quickly mention is this group items in bank rec. That's not switched on by default. This is an option, again, an option that's been around for a long time. The idea of this setting is it's really aimed at, let's say you've got two branches of from the same company. You might invoice those branches separately. So you've got two customers, let's say customer one, customer two. You invoice them both for £100, but you just receive one payment. So that payment on your bank statement would show as one value. But to show two invoices being paid off in Sage, what you would do is you would have to pay off one invoice against customer one, and then you would need to show the receipt coming against customer two as well. So in Sage, you've actually got two transactions. Now, following certain criteria and with this option switched on, it means in the bank reconciliation window, it can group those transactions together. It's not a massive gain, that one, because you can always select the two transactions. But it isn't switched on by default. I would tend to leave that switched off, this one, and just manually select multiple transactions if needed. The third and final setting to quickly mention just before we get stuck into the reconciliation itself is within your bank accounts area. So if there are any bank accounts that you don't want to reconcile, maybe you don't receive a statement for them. So petty cash, you're not going to receive a statement for that one. Let's say this bank deposit account. If I go into it, what I can do is I can just say no bank reconciliation. So I don't want to be reconciling this one. So I just tick the box, save it. Now what that would mean is if I select that bank account and click the reconcile option, and some of you may find this, is when you click it, you'll get this warning saying the bank account selected has been marked as not requiring bank reconciliation. So we just okay that. So we can't get into the reconciliation for that one because we've got it switched off. If we highlight an account that doesn't have that little tick box selected, then when we click reconcile, we're straight into the statement summary, and that's what we're going to look at next. Lydia, your question there, how do you access the PDF of reconciled items? I'll show you that towards the end. Once we've reconciled, you'll see the one that we get created. Right, let's just cancel out of that for the time being. I'm going to pop back to the slides just for a moment, just to quickly mention that little window that popped up there when I clicked that reconcile for that first bank account. So when we do that, the statement summary pops up. So it's got some fields which are pre-populated, and you've got some options on here. Now, I think if you've never done a reconciliation before, this option, and definitely when you get into the reconciliation option, because there's so much information on there, loads of transactions, buttons, it can feel a bit daunting when you first start. But it is just a logical sequence of steps that you're going to follow. So this statement summary window shows you certain information. First two fields being the bank account number that you've got selected, and then the name of that bank account. You've then got a statement reference. The statement reference is made up of the bank account number, so 1200 refers to, when I say bank account number, it's the nominal code number that's in Sage. So 1200 will be in my case. It then shows you the date that you've accessed that on. So it shows the date in reverse order as well. And then it will have, initially it'll have 01 on the end. The 01, the significance of that is just, it's the first time we would have reconciled that bank account and accessed it with today's date. If I do another one, let's say I'm playing catch up, if I go into the statement summary, into reconcile again, that window will pop up, but it'll just have 02 on the end, and 03, 04, etc. Now, we'll use that statement reference for the file name of the PDF document that gets created when you actually click reconcile. And you can change that completely if you want to. So if you've got like maybe you want to put the name of your bank in there, and if you've got a paper statement, you've probably got some sort of reference number on there. So again, you could use that, but put something in that you'll recognize. The ending balance and statement date, you're going to get that from your statement. Or again, if you're working from online banking, what are you trying to agree to? So the ending balance would be the closing balance on your statement, and the statement date, just what's the date that that statement runs up to. Again, if you're using online banking, it's going to pick up today's date, so you could just leave it as that, but you can change both of those if required. There's an option to reverse a reconciliation. I still think of that as a fairly new option there. So if you make a mistake and you make a complete mess of your reconciliation, you might just think, or maybe you've taken over from someone and you're at that point, and it's quite common, where you think that person didn't have a clue what they were doing. They've just been selecting random transactions and the reconciliation is all over the place. You might think, actually, we're better off rather than trying to fix it, we'll just start again, so you could undo some of those reconciliations. And that will give you the opportunity to go back to essentially a certain point in time as far as your reconciliation is concerned. Final two options there is your opportunity to enter any interest earned or any account charges. Now you can enter them at this point, and that will obviously create them in Sage for you. I tend to recommend that you would just enter them in the reconciliation window at the point you come across them. So as you're working through your bank statement, if you come across any interest earned or account charges, you just enter it there and then. But you do have that option, nice and easy. You just key in the amount, pop in the date of that transaction, choose the appropriate nominal code and appropriate tax code for the type of transaction that you're wanting to enter, and then you just click OK, and that's going to take you into the reconciliation window, and that's what we're going to look at next. Right, now when we go into the reconciliation window, and I'll pick this, we'll see this in just a moment, your starting point is going to be in that bottom box. It shows you your last reconcile balance. It should match the opening balance on your statement. So that last reconcile balance is essentially the closing balance from the last reconciliation, the last figure that you agreed to. So we'll switch across to my screen. Louise, your quick question there, why is account charges? Why is it T2? Account charges or finance charges in the UK, they're classed as being exempt of VAT. So you would use T2, which is the exempt tax code. So it doesn't calculate any VAT because it's classed as being exempt, but because you've used T2, it gets declared on the VAT return. So it makes no impact on let's say you're on the standard VAT scheme, it would have no impact on your overall VAT liability, but it still gets declared. It's quite common that people will use T0, which is for zero rated transactions, which that would still impact on the VAT return in the right way. And the other one that people use is T9, which is for non-VATable transactions. And that would mean that any bank charges don't then get declared on your VAT return. So the correct tax code to use is T2. If you haven't been doing that, maybe speak to your accountant or HMRC just to see if you need to put some sort of adjustment through to your next return. But overall, it wouldn't impact on your VAT liability, just the way it needs to be declared. Hope that makes sense. May have opened a hornet's nest for you, that one. Right, okay, let's get back to my screen. So we're going to go through that reconciliation process. So in bank accounts, we select the relevant bank. So we'll just use 1200. Click reconcile at the top. And that statement summary window, it appears. So I'll just accept the statement reference that comes up, but obviously I can click into that and I can change it if required. Your ending balance. Now this balance here, it's by default, it's just going to pick up this balance here. Or you would expect it to, unless of course you've entered maybe some future dated transactions. But you would expect this figure here, as long as you haven't entered future dated transactions, to be the same. But chances are you've entered some transactions beyond the date that your bank statement runs up to, which in my case I have. So I'm going to change that. And the figure I'm going to try and agree to is minus £474. So slightly overdrawn still. I'll just tab out of that field and I'll go across to the statement date. Now the statement date is the date that your statement runs up to. So if you are playing catch up, this is quite a useful option, this one as well. So I'm going to reconcile in my case up to, I'm just going to choose the 18th of January. Now, this has a number of benefits. It'll use this date as it flags your transactions as being reconciled, which we'll see a little bit later. But also it filters out the reconciliation screen. So those transactions that haven't yet been reconciled, for them to appear in the reconciliation, they must be on or prior to the statement date that we entered. Any subsequent dated transactions, they will be filtered from the list, which means you've got a fighting chance if you are playing catch up, because those more recent transactions aren't going to be included in that screen. Right, so we're just going to leave the statement reference. Ending balance, I've keyed that in. I've changed the statement date. I'm going to leave the other two blank, interest earned and account charges. We'll enter some account charges a little bit later. Hopefully the method that I guide you through as well will explain why we do it in that way. So we just okay that for the time being, and then we'll maximize that so we can see the full reconciliation window. So this is the point where, and even those of you that have done it before, you might still feel a little bit daunted, but this is the point where if you've never done it before, you think, where do I start? So as I say, logical steps. So the main part of the screen here, we've got what we term our unmatched transactions at the top. So these are the transactions that you've entered against this bank account that we're reconciling, that are dated on or prior to this ending balance. So if, for instance, let's say I change this date to the 5th of January. And as I tab out of that field, you'll see quite a few of my transactions disappear. That's because it filters that list. So I'm just going to set that back. So what we've got are bank transactions that are posted to this specific bank account that are dated on or prior to this date that we've entered at the top, that statement end date, and that are also haven't yet been reconciled. So if you think I've entered a transaction and it's not appearing in this box, why is that? It doesn't meet part of that criteria. So it's going to list bank transactions. Wouldn't list an invoice, it would list maybe the receipt or payment against that invoice. So it's the banking transaction that's listed. The bottom box, you'll see how we sort of were moving transactions from the top as we match them. And that's the process that we're going to be going through today. But the bottom box it's only got one thing in there at the moment, and it's this last reconcile balance. Now, your starting point when you come into the reconciliation is to ensure that this is right. Does it agree with the opening balance on your bank statement? The closing balance from your previous reconciliation will be the opening balance, or this last reconcile balance, for your subsequent reconciliation. So closing balance from one bank statement is the opening balance for the next. So this is your starting point. Is it right? It needs to be. If it isn't, then there's information in our help centre, and obviously our support team is on hand as well. So sometimes this could be the most difficult part when you first get going with reconciliation. How do I get that? How do I get into the right position? So if it is, we're ready to start reconciling and matching our transactions. Jackie, you just mentioned there, I think our Jackie's just picking that up as well about your department. I'm going to show you how you can enter some bank charges a little bit later on, and it will give you the opportunity to enter a department as well. So we will include that in the demo. It's just it doesn't give you the option of entering a department and specifying that when you enter it on the statement summary when you first that initial window. Right, we've come into the reconciliation. We've checked that last reconcile balance. We agree with it. We're ready to start. Now, just before we start matching, I'll just quickly cover these three boxes at the top. This information is pulled through from the statement summary. If I want to get back to that, we can just click that little pencil icon attached to the reference. Takes me back, and I can make any changes there if required, including going back to enter interest earned and account charges if needed. But I can just literally click into the boxes if I need to change any of these three as well. Right, let's start matching our transactions. So we got our statement in front of us. We agree with the opening balance on that statement, and we're looking for that first transaction that's listed. So we're going to say we can see a rent payment, £780 on the bank statement. We just need to find the equivalent one that we've entered into Sage, assuming that we have entered it. So we'd look through this list at the top. Now mine's quite a small list at the top. You might find you've got a lot more transactions. You might have hundreds, if not thousands of transactions there since your last reconciliation. What you can do, and what I would recommend, is that if you hover over the sort of the divide between these two boxes, you can drag it. It's a lot more beneficial to have a larger box at the top, just so you can see more transactions listed. Anyway, we find the relevant transaction, so we'll say it's that one. Rent, in the payment column, it's the right amount. So we select it, and all we do is we then click match. And when we do that, it moves it to the bottom box. Now, what we want to do, and this is what I just always describe as a bit of a foolproof method, this one, to reconciling, is when you match a transaction, so the process of moving it to the bottom box, check that running balance. Does it agree with the running balance on your bank statement or your online banking? Does it agree at that point? If it does, fine, move on to the next one. If it doesn't, you've just probably selected something that's incorrect. So maybe you've just looked and thought, oh, it said rent, that's it. And actually you haven't checked the value. Maybe it's been entered as a receipt rather than a payment. So actually, when you match it, it affects that running balance the wrong way. Maybe you've just looked at like the check, like a reference number, and thought, oh, well, that's it. And again, you haven't checked the likes of the value. So that's the case when you match it, you're checking that running balance, it's incorrect. So you've just identified an issue. Now, we're going to say ours is correct. So it's right. So actually, we move on to the next one on the statement. There is always some weird and wonderful techniques that I've come across over the years. Some people will select all their payments first. Some people do all their receipts. Some people just select everything and just literally highlight everything and think, oh, that one and that one haven't cleared yet. So they deselect it, then they just match everything and then they think, well, it doesn't match. But there's a weird and wonderful technique. So if you're doing them one at a time, just when you match it, check that running balance. If it agrees, right, move on to the next one. Our next one, we'll just say it's a payment to one of our suppliers, £700. Can we see it on the list? Yes, we can. That's it. So again, we just highlight it, we'll click match. It moves it to that bottom box. Now it appears in red, and the reason for it switching from black to red there on the list is just that the balance has now switched to a negative, that running balance. You might find as we select other transactions, it goes back to black as it hits a positive value. That's why. Right, we'll say next one is from one of our customers. It's a sales receipt, £500, so we'll select it. We can see it on the list. Again, nice and easy in my example. Now, we can either highlight it and click match, or we can just double click it. When we double click it, it does the same thing as highlighting it and then clicking match. It moves it to that bottom box. We can see it here. Similarly, if we select the wrong transaction, we can highlight it at the bottom. We can click unmatch, and it moves it from the bottom back to the top there. Just double click it to put it back down. We can also double click it at the bottom as well. Again, moves it to the opposite box. But we want it to be matched, so there it is there. Now next, we've got some money being paid into our bank account. Now, let's say we can't find that value, but actually it's these four added together. We've paid in one amount into our bank, but actually it covers these four transactions. So what I need to do is highlight, if I can highlight all four. Now, if you find you're doing this and you're clicking on them and it's just sort of the highlights following you around, what you can do is just hold down your control key and then click onto the other ones and it'll select them, so it highlights them. If you select more than one transaction, you'll find this has got your cumulative value here for what you've got selected. So if we were to select another one, just say it's that one, you'll see that that value changes. If we deselect it, you'll see again it updates. So these four, we've got four individual transactions in Sage, but actually we just see one on the bank statement, but it adds up to 696. So if I'm happy with that, I click match, it moves those selected transactions into that bottom box. And it's just a case of repeating that. So as you match, check that running balance. Does it agree? Yes, it does. Right, move on to the next one. Now I'll just quickly run through the majority of these. I'm just going to double click them just to get rid of some of them. Let's get rid of that one as well. And let's do that one as well. Right. So we're going to say we've matched everything. Now this transaction here, we've entered it into Sage. It looks like in this case it's a check. It's dated on the 18th, but hasn't yet appeared on our bank statement. That's fine. Hasn't cleared our bank yet. So again, giving us that idea about the cash flow we mentioned earlier. So we know this transaction hasn't cleared our bank yet. Still, presumably it'll do that once it's paid into the accountant's bank account. Right, now let's say we come across some transactions that we can't find them in Sage. So maybe we haven't entered them yet. So the first one we're going to pick on is, let's say a customer has paid us £100. They've paid us online. It's gone straight to our bank account. We've either forgot to enter that, or maybe they just haven't informed us and they've made a payment. So when we come across transactions like that we know haven't yet been entered into Sage, we've got these options along the top. So bank receipts, bank payments, etc. Now, some of you might think, well, actually, I could just save the progress where I'm up to. I could close out and I could go and enter that in the bank, but no need to sort of spoil your rhythm while you're in the bank reconciliation. You can just use these options along the top. So we're going to say it's £100 from a customer. It's on our statement, but we can't see it in Sage. So we want to do a customer receipt. We can see it's from this A1 Webinars customer. You can see when we select that, there's nothing outstanding on their account. So let's just say they've paid a deposit to us. Set the date. I'll set that date to, I'll just use the 18th. Reference, I'll say deposit. And then we'll say it was for £100. Now, when we save that transaction, because we haven't allocated against the transaction, when we click save, we get this message. There's an unallocated payment of £100. Do you want to post that as a payment on account? So we're just going to click yes. Now, if you're not familiar with supplier payments or customer receipts, we have run some webinars on that. So Jackie ran one just yesterday afternoon, I think it was, or yesterday morning, sorry, on that one. So there is a recording of that just to get you up to speed if you're not that familiar with it. Anyway, that's saved. So we close out of that screen. Let's just drag the middle bit here a little bit so we can see more of the bottom transactions now. And we can see the transaction now. So it posts it as a transaction, in this case, an SA transaction, a payment on account. It posts that into our accounts, and it automatically matches it. So it's in this bottom box. And essentially it's automatically transferred to that bottom box for us. Saves us entering the transaction, it being listed here, and then matching it. Just does it automatically when you save it. Final transaction, I'm going to say, is some bank charges. So let's say that's the last one on my bank statement. Let's say we've got some charges of £50. We need to enter that into our accounts. Now remember, I did say earlier, you could have entered that at the statement summary stage. I could do that now if I needed to. But also picking up on, whose question was it again? Jackie's question from earlier about not being able to specify a department, etc. at this stage. Gives you a bit more flexibility using these options along the top. So bank charges, you'd normally then enter that as a bank payment into your accounts. So I choose the bank payment option and just fill it in just as normal. So I'm going to do 1801-2025, the date in there. Reference, I'll just say charges. I'll ignore the extra reference. Nominal code, I could do a quiz on that one, see if anyone knew it, but 7901 for bank charges by default. Department, obviously it picks up a default there, but I can amend that if required. I've got the projects option enabled on mine, so at this stage it does prompt me for the project reference and cost code. I'm going to ignore that. Details, I'm just going to say bank charges. And then we're going to say £50. And again, going back to what we mentioned earlier, bank charges or finance charges in the UK, they are classed as being exempt to VAT. So we need to choose T2. So no tax is calculated, but it means it will still declare the transaction on your VAT return where applicable. So we just save that transaction, close out, and again, we can see the charges as being entered into our accounts now. So if we were to look in the transactions list or on the bank activity for this bank account, you would see that transaction listed just as if you had entered it within bank accounts and bank payment. It's matched it automatically. Again, check the running balance. Does it agree? Yes, it does. Happy with that. And we're going to say, essentially, that's it done. We've worked through our statement. We've ticked everything off that we needed to. We've entered any missing transactions. We've got a transaction here which relates to Jodie's question. Jodie's just asking, would I ever have a transaction in Sage that's not on my bank yet? So exactly the same as this one. We've got a check that we've keyed into Sage, but it hasn't yet cleared our bank, so it doesn't appear on our bank statement or our online banking. That's fine. We just leave it there. Nothing's happened with that one yet. It will just get pulled through onto the next reconciliation. So just leave it. That's fine. But at this stage, we think we've finished everything. We've agreed with that running balance. We're ready to reconcile. Now, just before I do click the reconcile option at the top, I'll quickly run you through some of the options that you've got on your screen just to try and explain them to you. So view history, we'll come back to that one a little bit later. Report, some people like to print that out when you first come into this screen. So it'll just give you a list of unmatched and matched transactions. You might prefer to work off some sort of report rather than working off the screen. You've got your options along the top for entering any missing transactions that you haven't entered into Sage yet. You've got an option to print the list, so essentially print the status of this screen. You've got an option to send it to Excel. Just give it a click so you can see what that looks like. Drag it across so you can see it as well. There we go. So basically it contains all the information that's on that reconciliation screen. You've got the basic information from you've got this bit, the statement summary. You've got the top box, that's the current state of play of that, what we term the unmatched items. You've then got the matched items in the order that they've been matched as well. So again, you might want to take a copy of that. You don't have to, because it will create that PDF document we're looking at a little bit later. Let's just close out of that one. Coming down the side, you've got the find option. That's probably not applicable in my demo today, but the find option, if you've got hundreds, if not more transactions listed, you might find this useful. So I can choose what it is I'm looking for in this top box. Is it a certain value? If it was, right, well, I'll just choose net amount and get it to search for that. Is it on a certain date, or does it contain certain details? And again, it'll just start jumping through that list of Sage transactions just to try and get you to it a little bit quicker. Let's close out of that one. Now, swap and clear, you've got that for the top box and the bottom box. You might already be familiar with that from selecting records in other areas of the software. And all it does, swap will highlight everything that isn't, it swaps the highlight selection. Probably work a little bit better if I do it on the bottom. So I select those three. If I click swap, it reverses the highlight selection. And then clear, it removes all highlights. So you've got that for the top box, swap and clear, and you've got them for the bottom box. You've got the totals. So as you select transactions, we saw that one a little bit earlier when we selected those 4 counter sales transactions. It just adds them up for you. And you've got a similar for the bottom. If you highlight a couple of transactions, you'll see it just adds up. So you've got a total for whatever you've got selected. These 2 arrows are used just to reorder the transactions. So if we wanted to, this transaction here, this payment we've made, if we thought actually we want it to be above this printing of leaflets, we can highlight it and then just reposition it. So you can see it moves it up the list to wherever we want that to be. You've got some totals at the bottom as well. So total payments, total receipts. When you think you're finished, you've probably got that information, total money in, total money out. You've probably got those totals on your statement. So again, just a cross-reference. Your matched balance is the running balance that you've got. So again, when you're finished, that should equal your ending balance that we've entered at the top. You've got a little calculation based on that at the bottom as well. Obviously, these 2 should be equal as long as you've entered that ending balance at the top. You should have a difference of 0. If you do have a difference still, you've either entered your statement balance, your ending balance incorrectly, or this running balance just doesn't agree. So again, something missing, or you've done something wrong. Now, if you find your reconciliation is quite a lengthy process, and maybe you don't have time to just sit there and complete that, or you get interrupted and you're on to the next task and you think, oh, I'll come back to the reconciliation as and when I'm ready, you can click Save Progress. You'll get a message, just okay that. And then when you are ready, just to pick up where you left off, make sure you got the right bank selected, into Reconcile. Make sure you click use saved rather than discard saved. So you're going to click use saved and you're back to where you were, so you can pick up where you left off. Now, other than that, we're all done. We're ready to flag everything. So we click reconcile, little progress bar there, and that's it done. We'll return to the reconciliation window, the bank accounts window. That's my reconciliation complete. Right, what's happened in the background? So first of all, if we go into the bank record, what we can see is in this bank reconciliation area, it's recorded the date that we reconciled up to. It's also recorded the value that we agreed to as well, that last reconcile balance. So it updates that. So that little progress bar, that's one of the things that happens. Also, it creates that bank reconciliation PDF. So within the bank record, if we go to the memo tab, we have a folder called statements. If we open that one, and then you will have essentially a PDF copy of what you've just done. So if I select it, which is the 13th today, I'll just double click it. And this is the reconciliation PDF file that gets created. So it's got that opening balance on there. It's got the transactions that were moved to that bottom box, and it lists them in the order that they were there as well. So you've got that available should you need it. Now, you won't be able to access it that way if you are on the essentials level of the software. If you're on the essentials level of the software, what you need to do is if you go back into the reconcile window, you can click onto view history and it will take you to that same folder. Or you could manually navigate to that folder as well. So this will give you an idea of the path of where that's held. But the easiest options, as I say, just into the reconciliation, either view history or within the bank record on that memo tab. If you're on standard or accounts professional, just go into statements and you've got them listed. Now, what happens to those transactions that we'd selected? If we pop into the transactions list, you can see the bank payment, the charges that are entered during that reconciliation process. A couple of things happen to the transaction. If you just scroll across to the right a little bit. Firstly, the bank column. Any bank transaction that hasn't yet been reconciled has an N against it. So it changes the N to an R to say that transaction has now been reconciled. But it also records the date that you were reconciling up to. So the 18th in my example, it records that against that transaction, just so I've got a bit of traceability should I need it. But other than that, that's my reconciliation complete. So now if you've got any questions, we're going to come back to them. I'll try picking some of those up myself in a moment as well. But keep them coming, pop them in there. We're going to hang around for a few more minutes as well. I just want to quickly mention a little bit about bank feeds to you. Now, I did mention earlier as well that we have a webinar as part of the Banking Excellence webinar series. We have a one on bank feeds, and I think that's on Tuesday of next week. So if you haven't yet, get signed up. So bank feeds, what is it all about? So it's essentially a way of connecting Sage to your bank to help streamline the process that we've just gone through, that matching exercise. So you do it in the bank feeds area rather than within reconciliation. Rather than accessing your online banking or waiting for your bank statement, those transactions will be downloaded automatically for you. So if you imagine rather than sitting there with your statement, comparing those to what you've entered in Sage, what you'll get for bank feeds is you'll get essentially your downloaded transactions on the left and your Sage transactions on the right. And it's just a case of you matching them off. There is lots of benefits to bank feeds. It'll auto match where it can. You can manually match, but you can also set up rules as well. So with the rules option, as a transaction download, so a bit like those bank charges that we entered in the demonstration, if we create a rule to say, right, when you download any transactions, if any of them have, let's say, the description or the reference of bank charges, what I want you to do is I want you to enter that as a bank payment into my accounts. I want you to post it with, let's say, the T2 tax code because it's an exempt transaction, and I want you to automatically do that. Saves me having to do it manually in my accounts. So bank feeds and rules, it can really speed up that reconciliation process, particularly if yours is quite a lengthy task as well. So if you haven't yet signed up, watch out for your follow-up email. It will include the link that you need. You'll get that in around about an hour's time. So if you're going for your lunch at 12, it'll be there for when you get back. So last call for questions. If you've got any, please pop them in there. Try and pick them up in just a moment. Remember, as part of the webinar series that we're running on banking excellence at the moment, loads of sessions to sign up for. If you do sign up for, you must attend a minimum of 6 of the 8 sessions, plus one of the quiz sessions. If you do that, then you will qualify for your digital badge. As I say, that will be issued normally within about 2 weeks of the webinar series ending. So if you haven't yet, get yourself signed up. The timetable currently runs up to the end of March, so we've just literally added those sessions. So in March, we'll be covering things like credit control, VAT, so some of the favorite topics that you have. So again, have a good look through there and get yourself registered for any topics that appeal. Now, before I join in with questions, if anyone's about to leave, many thanks for coming along. I hope you've enjoyed it, giving you a little bit more insight into the bank reconciliation. Again, some of you will be very experienced in this area. You may have other tips as well that you think, oh, why didn't he share that tip? There's only so much we can cover. So if you are, hopefully you're going away reassured just that your knowledge, maybe you think, right, well, yeah, I know all of that. Great. You'd be a little bit more confident. If you've never done it before, hopefully it doesn't feel as daunting as you thought it might be. If you've got any feedback for us on today's session, then if you can take a minute to complete the survey, give us a score. Any comments, thoughts, ideas that you want to share with us, pop them on there as well. Should take you about a minute maximum. Greatly appreciated if you can do that. We love reading those comments as well. And also your follow-up email, that will be with you in around about an hour's time. Right, okay, let's see if we've got any questions I can help out with. I think Matt and Jackie have been on just about on top of those. Davina, you mentioned there, occasionally you might have rounding issues on your values because of VAT. The only way you can change those is by editing your transaction. So you'll either if it's a case, it's a transaction that's maybe appeared on your bank and it's slightly different to what you've entered in Sage, you would have to adjust the Sage transaction. Now, that might be a case you're not really in a position you can do that because it was an invoice you've issued, etc., or received, and slightly different value. It might just be a case that, well, if there's a 1 penny overpayment or underpayment, that you enter an additional invoice or receipt just for that 1 pence only. Quite a common one, that one. And I think that is the only other question we have. A couple of tips coming through about other tips that we could have shared. Again, we can't cover everything. So we try to just cover the basics, but have a go, see how you get on. There are detailed step-by-step guides available from our help centre. Right, we'll end the webinar just at that point. If you do think of anything, remember our support team is on hand and there's loads of fabulous information available from our help centre to guide you through that process if needed. Many thanks for your time. Hopefully we'll see you again on some of the other sessions soon.